You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph, and I'm joined here today again with Jason Aponte. You know, the other day we got some Debo news sprung on, and he was a good sport. He stayed on. We did that live. But today we're not even going to bring up Debo. We're not going to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. None of that. We are going to talk about defensive backs that the 49ers might be looking into in this draft coming up in just a few days. So, to introduce Jason, I mean, we all know who he is. He's the YouTube 49ers GOAT. He's the 49ers Twitter GOAT. He was at the Senior Bowl, the Combine, and you're going to be at the NFL Draft, right?
Yep, I leave Monday, actually. So I'll be in the Bay for a little bit. I'll be in the Bay for a little bit before we make the move over to Vegas. But yeah, it's an exciting time, man. I you know, with all the talk about all the other things that right now we really can't control, it's really kind of refreshing that we're going to be looking forward to the NFL Draft. And I think that a lot of these discussions about prospects will help us not forget, because it's still there. So, like, it's like you got the front of your mind and the back of your mind. So in the back of your mind, Debo's up here. But at least for this week, you have the first round of the draft, and that should be in the front of your mind at this point. So I think that's what we're here for.
Right, absolutely. So we're going to be a good distraction for all the people watching and listening right now. All right. So, and just I wanted to point out that this is pre-recorded. So if you guys are posting comments, posting questions, we are not ignoring you. Okay. Please continue to post your comments amongst yourselves and, you know, go ahead, chat and all that. Before we get into, you know, some people that the 49ers may look into the draft, I want to talk about the current state of, you know, the cornerbacks and safeties. All right. So, we have corners, Charvarius Ward, who they just signed this offseason. That was like probably their biggest signing. Emmanuel Mosley, of course, Ambry Thomas, Diamador Lenore coming into their second years. And of course, Dante Johnson. At safety, we have George Odom, Jimmy Ward, Tarvarius Moore, and Talanoa Hufanga. What do you think about this group? I mean, the 49ers did also lose K1 Williams. Okay. He signed with the Broncos. Marcel Harris, someone I was hoping they would sign after the draft. You know, he just got picked up, I believe, by the Jets, right? So, you know, with this group, what's missing still? I kind of feel like safety is a little iffy, right?
Yeah, it's safety for me at this point, especially because Jimmy Warden's heart were as solid as it gets. And I reject all sorts of narratives that are thrown out about, man, you know, turnovers, things like that. Look, sometimes the best play is the play that doesn't get thrown to, right? Like if Tart's wiping away a guy and it forces that quarterback to look somewhere else and it turns into an interception, how can you not say that Tart contributed to that even if he didn't get the interception? And those are the little things I feel that are lost. So on the back end, you've got Jimmy Ward, who is as flexible as it is, right? You can use him in the slot. You can put him a single high. He can do everything. But you still need another complementary safety who can do all of the things that Tart did, a la wipe everything out up top, be very good at run defense, also be as sure a tackler as him because he was the shortest tackler on his team. So, yes, safety is going to be the spot that I'm looking at the most, especially when you consider there is a large chance that Jason Verrett is back this year as a corner, right? And look, I get it. You know, another injury and 49er fans, you're probably rolling your eyes like, don't do this again. But when you start to look at Charvarius Ward, Emmanuel Mosley, and Jason Verrett, now you have the option of possibly starting Ward and Verrett on the outside, which would make them a premier 1-2 duo in the league, no matter who you would ask. And then Emmanuel Mosley has a chance to kick inside. And now you're talking about quality depth. Ambry Thomas came on at the end of the year. We still don't know what Diamador Lenore is. And Dante Johnson is literally as steady as it gets. I'm tired of everybody making jokes about him, man, because when his number's called, he usually does his job. And the only reason you're upset is just he continues to get chances. But what is it about him that this organization continues to give chances to? I think that's the way you should start to look at it and how solid he is. But yeah, I think it's safety. And it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's a strong safety or a free safety. Those things are interchangeable in this scheme. Those guys flip sides and they just move around. So I wouldn't be too worried about, well, they need a strong safety. They just need another safety. Nothing against Talanoa Hufanga, but I fear for him being out there in coverage by himself in certain spots. And I just don't think that that's suited to his game. It's not me knocking him down. That is, just like many other players have, a negative, a weakness to his game. Nobody's perfect. And that's why I think the safety is going to be probably the biggest spot.
Right. Yep. Talanoa Hufanga definitely has some growing to do. I mean, he shows some flashes, but definitely probably not ready to take on the Tart, role. So I'm glad you mentioned Jason Verrett, though, because that's someone who I think and I hope they can bring back after the draft, as well as maybe Tavon Wilson, just extra depth at safety. And do you see nickel being a bigger need as well? I know you mentioned that, if they sign a safety or if they sign Verrett, they can then kick out mostly to the slot. A question for you is, do you think if they draft a safety, they're looking at a versatile safety that can also play the slot as well?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing is, when you start to look at this safety group, a lot of them were at the Senior Bowl, a lot of them were at the Combine. You start to dig into their tape and you start to figure out, okay, there's guys higher up on the board, but they still have some of those weaknesses. So scheme fit matters here at this point. Like, the number one safety on the board wouldn't necessarily be perfect for every single team, because, we're going to talk about Nick Cross and we're going to talk about Jaquan Brisker and we're going to talk about Lewis Seen, and those are the top guys, right? The guys but I have concerns with Nick Cross and being able to cover. I have concerns with Brisker being able to cover. Brisker feels more like a box safety, but everybody has him higher up. Those are the things that I think a lot of it has to come down to scheme, how they want to be utilized, because the 49ers love their flexibility on the back end. And so much of what they were able to do on defense to cover up for the cornerbacks was because of their safety play and covering things up on the back end and making sure that nobody's out of position and things like that. Now you're going to need that same sort of flexibility, but with an upgraded corner room, now you can probably play around with whatever it is that you want to do. But I still feel that this team needs two guys, Jimmy Ward and someone else, who can do it all, right, in that same flexible way, because it makes you so unpredictable on defense and be able to show so many different exotic looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And now looking at the draft and some of the players who they have started looking at. I mean, I got this list here. It's a little small, but you can see the full list on 49ersgoldmine.com. This is a list of DB prospects that the 49ers have met with. These are confirmed visits. As you can see, there's a lot for the official top 30 visits. And so this gives you a good idea of who they're looking at, because more often than not, the people who they end up visiting with, they do end up drafting. This happens pretty often. Obviously, they're not going to draft all these guys, but it just shows they do have legit interest in them. So we're going to talk about some of these guys, not all of them, but let's start with the first one. And this is someone who they recently met with, Penn State safety Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State. You can see here I have his RAS score up. A lot of green, lots to be excited about in terms of his athleticism. So, and another thing I want to point out, John Lynch and Adam Peters were at Penn State Pro Day. So make of that what you want. Maybe they were there for Ebiketie as well. But Brisker was someone who they met with, top 30. So, there is legit interest there. So what do you think about Brisker and what he would bring?
I think he's great downhill in run defense. He can cover in the slot, but that's not necessarily his strength. Like, having him turn his hips and get back in coverage, that's the stuff that I kind of get a little bit worried about at this next level. But everything else, he's a thumper. He's great downhill. Again, get him in a spot where he can get down and attack the ball carrier. And now you're looking at a guy who is going to make a difference in that way. The only concerns I would have are, his 40-yard dash is very good. You saw the green there. That looks really good. It's about turning his hips and being able to get back on other receivers at this next level. That kind of just makes me a little bit wary, but he's the guy that everybody is very excited about. I mean, as you can see right here, this is what I'm talking about. Downhill, boom, look at him get from that top level all the way down. And that's the when he's able to play downhill with speed, and he's able to play with instinct and not have to worry about deciphering anything and just being a football player. That's his strength right there. And look how high up he is here at this portion right here. Like, he's at the goal line. So they're throwing it up, and he gets a chance to at least like be right there. Like, he read that perfectly, and he was able to play closer, like move forward. It's about going back for Jaquan Brisker that scares me a little bit.
Okay. Well, at Penn State, he had 151 tackles, 10 of those for loss, 5 interceptions, 14 pass breakups. And you mentioned the 4.49. So he's a bit of a burner as well. And I think an underrated factor to him is, he probably brings some good leadership. One thing I saw about him, he was team captain at his high school, at Lackawanna Community College before Penn State. And he was also a team captain at Penn State. So if they're looking for someone who brings a lot of leadership in the safety position, which I'm sure with Jaquan Tart being out, that's something they might, very, very well covet. The question is, will he make it out of the first? That's the big question for me. And the closer we get to the draft, it seems like he won't. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, his stock is rising fast. I think he's on everybody's board high up. So yeah, I don't see him sliding. I mean, the latest I could see is early second. It wouldn't shock me if he was the first safety off the board. I probably have Lewis Cine ahead of him, but he's going to be up there as one of the top 3 guys taken off the board. So it all depends on where Cine goes and then how the board lays out. But yeah, late first, early second at the minimum.
Yeah, Lewis Cine is definitely another name that could possibly go round 1. Kyle Hamilton, Daxton Hill as well is another name.
Kyle Hamilton, I forgot about him. I just don't talk about Kyle Hamilton. I don't think about him because he's not in the 49ers range.
Exactly. No, yeah, exactly. And so I think it's worth discussing Brisker because there's that chance that he could get out of the first. Same with Cine, I think. And if the 49ers do want to trade up to the early second to get him, I feel like that will be an option for them, but I'm not sure either of those make it to 61. But let's talk a little bit about Lewis Cine, hard-hitting safety out of Georgia. Again, lots of green, lots to be excited about. He made a ton of big plays in the national championship game. His 40 was one of the fastest for safeties. I think he was just 0.3 seconds off of the fastest time for a safety. And he led everyone at his position at the broad jump with the 11-1. Yeah, 11-1. So what do you think about Lewis Cine?
Oh man, I mean, this would be glorious. It's just flexible. He can he can tackle. He covers well. The thing that jumps out to me when I watched him is just how good he is with routes and his instincts on understanding what the concept is and knowing where to be. And just when you combine that with his raw athletic gifts, he's just a guy that screams one of the best safeties in this draft. And he's going to be somebody who is going to contribute on day one, jumping into this league, regardless of where he goes. Now, again, he's labeled as a free safety, but as we know, if he does slide, that doesn't matter in this scheme at all. And he would give them that same flexibility that Jimmy Ward. Imagine having somebody who is Jimmy Ward-like in his traits, in terms of he's just faster than Jimmy Ward. But in terms of being able to cover guys, being able to hit, being able to play in the box, being able to play up top, I think Lewis Cine has it all, man. And he's going to make whatever team drafts him is very happy, very, very happy.
Definitely seems like a very well-rounded safety. Like, he does everything well. You talked about some of the concerns you had with Brisker, like in coverage and, pedaling back. That doesn't seem like a concern with Cine, right?
Nope.
Not at all.
The weight would be the concern just a little bit for me. Like, but again, guys who play underweight and things like that, whatever you deem as underweight, that doesn't really matter if some guys are just naturally football players. So it doesn't matter about their weight and they're just going to continue. I think it would just be more about concerns about long-term for him with his weight like that, and injuries and things like that. But I'm sure that he'll put on some weight when he comes into the league. They'll put him on a regimen. I'm sure that that's something that's on every team's itinerary for him if they bring him in. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about that as much. I just think that that's the only real concern. Again, there's no perfect prospect. If I wanted to get negative on everybody, I could point out all the things that I'm nervous about. But for Scene, there's so many things that he does well that the weight thing is like way down on the bottom for me to be thinking about.
Yeah, agreed. And like you said, that's always something they can work on once they get into the league. And I'm sure he's working on it this offseason. Next, let's look at Jalen Peachtree. So also some green here. He has a 8.45 RAS score, but you can see his size. There's a lot of red, so there's some concern over his size a bit. He's 5'11", 198 pounds. What are your takes on Peachtree? I know he's one of your favorites. You saw him at the combine. What can you say about him?
It was the Senior Bowl that really turned it around for me with Peachtree. I mean, in the beginning, when I saw him in one-on-ones, and those one-on-ones they're designed to have the wide receiver show off. It's not for the people. So when you watch one-on-ones in the Senior Bowl and you watch guys either get burnt, whatever it is, they have no idea what that person's running in front of them. So if you have been defending people in the slot and you're taking things away, that was the stuff drawn to. But also, when I dive into his numbers, and they're right here on the screen, tackles for loss, forced fumbles, interceptions, everything. Like, the guy is everywhere, and he's been playing the star role in Baylor. What I mean by that is, like, he's the guy that they asked to pretty much do everything. So maybe those stats, they're not inflated because he's that good, but they are pushed up a little bit because they ask him to do a lot, but that just goes to speak to the playmaker that he is. I love Jalen Peachtree. Smooth in coverage, can play in the slot, can play in the box, can play up top. There's not many holes to his game at all. So I'm really excited about Jalen Peachtree. If he fell to the 49ers, or if the 49ers found a way to go up and get him and everything else is set, because remember, a lot of the 49ers draft plans are around the hanging cloud right now with Deebo Samuel. And is Alex Mack going to come back? And what do you address immediately? And that's the part that I think we had a bit of certainty after the combine, because John Lynch said, hey, we expect him to come back. Now we don't know. And then we had no idea what was coming down the line with Deebo. And there was a few weeks where it kind of was like, well, the 49ers address this, they address this, they address this. They kind of have ultimate flexibility. But now these two questions put the 49ers in a spot where who knows what they will do depending on who's on the board and depending on what they need to address.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, because there's still a lot of question marks. The closer that we get to the draft, I keep thinking that it will be safety with that first pick. At first, I thought it would be edge, no doubt, but I feel like they've kind of solidified themselves a little bit, at least with the depth that they have there. So I think they can afford to wait a little bit more on edge. And also, I've noticed that they've looked at some of the edges that they've visited with have been throughout the draft, guys that could go in later rounds. Whereas for safety, it's a lot of guys at the top, and there's a lot of talent at the top. So it makes sense why they would be looking at some of those guys. So Peachtree, he led safeties and run stops as a slot corner. His average depth of tackle was 0.8 yards. And like you said, like, that just speaks to his ability to shoot the gaps and be a good run defender. So I definitely liked what I saw out of him as well. Quick question for you, because he has a teammate who is also, going to get some looks as well, and he's going to be drafted as well. JT Woods, would he be a good consolation prize for someone if they missed out on Peachtree, or are they just like two completely different guys and not even in the same stratosphere?
No, he would. And again, scheme matters, fit matters, all of those things. And it's funny because when you think of Baylor, right, obviously RG3 went there, and you start to think about, well, what kind of prospects come out? You start watching Jalen Peachtree, and I'm like, wait a minute, well, who's that guy wide receiver? Oh, that's Jaquan Thornton. I'm like, oh, well, who's that other guy? JT Woods. So they've got ballers over there, man. Yeah, and it's not necessarily a consolation prize, but again, scheme matters, fit matters, coaching matters. And if you get him in the right spot, JT Woods would be a very nice consolation prize in that way.
All right, perfect. Well, in the time being, I am calling Brisker, Scene, and Peachtree the big three, because they seem to be the top names for the 49ers that, we all kind of like. That seems to be the consensus. Even Matt Mayoko said, the safety lends itself well for the 49ers at 61. Another reason why I think they go safety first, Mayoko's very plugged into these things, and he specifically named seeing Peachtree and Brisker as some names that they could look at. And so I think it makes all the sense in the world. Moving on to our next safety, though, let's talk a little bit about Nick Cross from Maryland. And Todd McShay actually had him mocked to the 49ers in round 2. So what do you think about Nick Cross? I mean, we're looking at his RES score, lots of green once again, 9.87 out of 10. So what did you see out of him?
6 foot, 212, 4.3 40, 37-inch vertical, 10-10 on the broad. That's really good. But when you watch him play, he's more of a thumper that plays downhill than he is better at being a high safety in that way. But when you think about, and maybe I might be contradicting myself here, but I think this is just specific to Nick Cross. When you look at what Jimmy Ward offers and you add Nick Cross, I think he can be a perfect complementary piece in that way because he still can play closer to the line. And then remember, there's an upgraded corner. There is. I mean, Charvarius Ward, look, no disrespect, he's better than Embry Thomas. Like, no disrespect. Like, I know he's better than him. So now you've got two guys that you really trust, Emmanuel Mosley and Ward. And now Cross doesn't have to necessarily be that guy on the back end that's wiping things out or anything like that. And maybe you can start playing around with just moving Jimmy Ward up top, keeping Cross in the box and using him to his strengths, which is, being a thumper, getting downhill. And I just feel like he's suited better for closer to the line of scrimmage than he is in just a single high look. And, the 49ers rotate that in and out. That's not something that's a staple all the time that they use. So, but yeah, Cross is somebody who is high up on everybody's board for good reason. But I would like to see him just a little bit more closer to the line and playing more like downhill and faster.
Okay. So it doesn't seem like he offers the same versatility as some of the other prospects that we've talked about to this point.
Probably not. Like, I mean, at this point, though, we're kind of splitting hairs here, right? Like, if you really want to play 4D chess, then have two safeties that are flexible. But what Jimmy Ward does, having a guy who can maybe play closer to the line might be beneficial. And as long as you're getting to the quarterback and not allowing him to be left out to dry on the back end, then there will be no reason to be worried about that. I don't have concerns with him with the way that I have Hufanga being able to cover on the back end. So no matter what about me saying that he needs to be closer to the line, it's not a concern to the point where I don't want Hufanga in single high or I don't want him trying to cover up top in any way. Like, it's not the same thing at all.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Next, let's talk about safety out of Oregon, Verone McKinley. Looking at his RAS score, there's a lot of red, which is strange because, when you watch him play, like he's obviously one of the top regarded safeties in this class. And so do you have a big concern over how players test out? I know there's some people that are like, oh God, he tested horribly. Like, he's going to go off some people's boards. He's going to drop so hard, like things like that. I don't have those same concerns, but I'm curious what you think.
I think it's the size, everything. I mean, you see the red with the height and the weight, and he profiles more of a cornerback than he does as a safety. Now, the good thing is that he's a ball hawk in coverage. Now, that's the really good thing because for all the 49er fans that complained about lack of turnovers from the safety, this is what he can bring you. But the size is an issue, and he's not even really bad against the run. Like, he's not bad against the run or anything like that, but that's in college. How is your size going to translate into the league? And here he is right there making an interception. Great. Ball hawking coverage. You love that, right? Like, you love that because you want to have turnovers. Turnovers change games, and you're willing to live with whatever shortcomings they have if they're turning the ball over, honestly, over and over. Hello, Josh Norman, for a little while there. But that's the thing is it's the size. How does it translate? That's my biggest concern. Can he translate it to the next level? And will that size hold him back from being very good in terms of being a ball hawk? He's there, and he's not bad against the run either, but it's the size, and all those red numbers that you just brought up on his screen really exemplify that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's definitely a ball hawk. I believe he had most interceptions out of some of these safeties. So, and we're seeing here's how we looked at it was at the Senior Bowl, I think. So
yeah, that was the one practice they didn't allow us in on because it was supposed to rain,
okay,
and it didn't even rain that day. Ridiculous. And
God,
we stood
that's
outside
lame.
the day that it rained.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that's what we have on safeties. I mean, obviously, there's so many other safeties that we could talk about. We'd be here like all day talking about them. But like we said, I think the 49ers are going to target someone early in the draft. So it's worth mentioning and talking about some of these people that, we just mentioned. But Jason, do you have any sleepers at safety that, you want people to know about, you would dump the table for?
I mean, I already talked about Peachtree. I think that's my guy, and I think I'm just gonna dig in on my heels
I
because
said
this is the first
sleepers,
time.
Jason.
Oh, I know. I mean, sleepers. I mean, I don't know, man. I really Kirby Joseph. There we go, from
Okay.
Illinois.
Okay.
Um,
Yes. He's
5
good
picks
too.
in 2021. I think that he was somebody that everybody's sleeping on because Illinois didn't exactly do well. 38-inch vertical, 10-3 broad. I think that he's a guy that people, if the 49ers took him, it wouldn't be a sexy pick and everybody would start looking around like, who? But I think that Kirby Joseph is somebody who is very good and has a chance to be very good and kind of it's just like flying under the radar because of how bad Illinois was.
No, that's definitely a name that, I was hearing a lot, earlier in the process. And yeah, it's kind of quieted down for him lately, but I think that would be a good one too. Personally, one of my favorite safeties is Marquise Bell. I talk about him all the time. He's one of my draft
HBCU,
crushes.
baby.
Yeah, let's go. So, he's one guy that could go, a little later that I think a team will be lucky with him, but who knows? Who knows? All right, let's move on to some corners because we've talked plenty about some of these safeties. Let's talk about some corners if the 49ers want to go that route. Like I said, they have met with some corners leading up to the draft. So it's not, out of question that they might, draft a corner, especially if they want to look for someone who is specifically just a nickel corner, maybe. I don't know. So let's first talk about Joshua Williams. Cornerback out of Fayetteville State, another HBCU prospect. All right. So what do you think about Joshua Williams? He was at the Senior Bowl as well, right?
Yes, he was. And that's a great way to start. When you look at these other colleges that aren't necessarily power 5 schools, the higher ups, anything like that, what you want to figure out is how they respond to better competition, right? No disrespect to anybody who's in the HBCUs or playing in FCS, anything like that, because you guys are still phenomenal football players. It's just the level of competition gets raised a bit. So what do? Do you respond? And I think he did in Mobile, right? And he kind of turned heads because, look, that's Khalil Shakir. That's somebody that everybody loves. Look, he's all over that. And I think that when I was looking at him, because he just like, I'm like, who's 30? Who's 30? And you look at Fayetteville and you're like, can you really do something like that with him? He's actually responding better to the competition. So that's why I think that he's going to be a guy that, and then when you look at his profile, big, long, lanky, and look, that's press, that's Dobbs. That's one of the biggest guys I've ever seen up close. He's huge. And he's able to jam him at the line and not even let him get off on his release. I think Joshua Williams is a big, big sleeper at corner and somebody who can really, really have an impact. But it may take him a little bit longer. I'm not saying that he can step in right away, 1 year thing. But if you want to bet on what you can get out of him, that's something that you may just have to push down the line, maybe into year 2, something like that. But I really walked away from the Senior Bowl after watching him a little bit more, really impressed with how he responded to the competition that was in front of him. And that's the best part about that, right? There were so many guys, right? Christian Watson went to NDSU. Jalen Tolbert went to North Alabama. He went to Fayetteville State. Those guys responded well to the LSU corners and the guys that are like in the SEC and all those things. And they played better against the competition. That's what you're really looking for when it comes to this. He can dominate at Fayetteville State all he wants, but can you do it against the guys that you will be playing on Sundays? And I think that he showed that he can. And I'm really excited about him. I just feel like nobody's really talking about him because of where he's from.
Yeah. And I mean, for players coming out of these D2 schools and, schools that aren't so much on the map, like the LSUs and whatnot, the Oregons, I mean, you have to show up at Senior Bowl, right? That's how you get your name out there. And so, like, it's really good to know that he did that. And yes, I definitely feel like he's climbing up draft boards a little bit. At least fans are talking about him a little bit more. I know he was on GMFB the other day, and they're talking about how great he is. And it seems like he's very humble too. He just looks like a very like humble kid. And man, so long, 6'3" safety, 79 tackles, 4 for loss, 22 pass breakups, 5 interceptions. And does he do punt returns too? Because he had a punt return touchdown as well.
I mean, he can, but I think the 49ers are going to bring in any and everybody who can help on one side of the ball while having a punt or a kick return in their bag, because of where they rank. 20th in punt returns, 28th in kickoff returns. So they're going to give everybody a chance. Ray McLeod, whoever they draft in the draft, it's not working with Brandon Ayuk and others. So I think that's a lot of what the 49ers want to address, especially when you look at the way they've addressed things in free agency with so many special teamers and maybe guys who can contribute defensively or offensively, like Ray McLeod, Odom, those guys. But I think that anybody who returns any sort of punts or kicks will be getting looked at by the 49ers.
Yeah, definitely. So he could do that. I know we didn't mention it yet, but was there any of the safeties that we talked about that does that as well?
I
don't think so. But
no, I don't think so. Actually, yeah, no. Mm-mm.
Okay. All right. Let's look at the next cornerback here. We don't have his RAS score, but we have this tweet from Jordan, and that's good enough for me. Talking about Cordell Flott out of LSU. He was also in for a top 30 visit with the 49ers, and currently he's projected to go about 3rd, 5th round in between there. You'll see here, Jordan said he mocked him in one of his mock drafts at pick 105 for the 49ers. So what do you think about Cordell? And I mean, DBU, man.
Right.
That's all you gotta say.
Imagine thinking about him in that range. I mean, he's tall, he's got long arms, he fights well. Like, I think in the same way that we're talking about tall and long arms, is kind of the concern is that he's a little lanky when it comes to being there. And remember, you have to be at the nickel position, not only a great tackler, as Jordan alludes to in his tweet, but you have to be able to identify the run fits, and you have to be able to identify where you can play and things like that. 6'1" is very good, runs well, makes up his ground from behind. For me, it's just a little bit the weaknesses that I see. Sometimes he lets too much separation happen on the routes, and he doesn't play with consistent body control in space for me. And look, those are all things that can be developed. But again, he is going to be a developmental guy, like going forward, like 3rd to 5th round. Like that's usually what those guys are. That's why when everybody is worried about who's going to be a day one starter, usually those are the 1st and 2nd rounders. Everybody else, you kind of have to at least wait a little while, unless there is some sort of disclaimer on the 1st and 2nd rounders about, well, either injury or they need time to develop. They're free. They just need to do more. With him, he is a bit of a developmental project. But that's why bringing Jason Verrett back for nothing, having Emmanuel Mosley be there in the slot, could afford them the time to have him kind of slide into that role if Diamador Lenore isn't improving in the fashion that they believe he can. Yeah.
Man, I think the 49ers have absolutely like improved their defensive back depth, which I think was put into question a lot last year, right? And with some of the injuries that they had, you had some of those guys playing. And so I think that's something that they've sort of insulated themselves against. And so, if they nail that first pick, whether it's the safety, I doubt they go corner early, but so I think it will be a safety, like I said. But if they can nail that pick, I think this is going to be a really, really good secondary unit for the 49ers.
100%. And that's a good thing, right? Is as much as maybe I'm not as high on Ambry Thomas as other people are, for him to be possibly with Jason Verrett, Ward, and Mosley, the 4th cornerback on your roster, exactly. that's amazing depth. That's amazing depth. And for me, I don't really necessarily see anything that Ambry did last year that would force you to say he needs to play over this person or this person. And clearly the 49ers don't believe that either, because they signed Charvarius Ward. So that's the thing about it. It's ultimate depth. And now you're talking about Dante Johnson being pushed further down and being, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. And not many teams have depth and guys that have experience over the years that you can rely on. And that would be a good thing for Ambry Thomas, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, let's look at one more corner that the 49ers can look at. I know he's been like a favorite of 49ers, especially like early in the mock draft season. Marcus Jones out of Houston. The 49ers have met with him twice, so I think there's legit interest there. They met with him at the combine, and they recently, earlier this month, had a Zoom meeting with him as well. So he had 5 interceptions, 13 pass breakups in 2021 alone. He contributes in the run game as well, which, as we mentioned, I think is going to be a bonus, definitely going to be a plus for any player that brings that for them. He had 9 total punt and kick return touchdowns in his career. That's huge to me. I mean, so if you could bring someone in who is a good corner, solid, and then also can bring you that, energy in the return game as well, I mean, that's not too bad. And I think right now he's probably going like round 3. I think that's like the talk with him. So what do you think about Marcus Jones?
He's a day 3 guy for sure, but he could wind up being one of the guys that we look back and say, how the hell did this happen? And why did we see this coming? And you know what's funny is last year he actually took reps at wide receiver too as well, like to show his that how good of an athlete he is. Again, all these things that are labeled right here on the screen, they're absolutely true. Smooth hips, able to open redirects with no issues, anything like that. Scrappy as an outside corner, and the special teams talent. Makes guys miss. That's the thing that you're really looking for, and that's the thing that the 49ers have been looking for as well, too. His acceleration is ridiculous. Like, he gets to his top speed fast and immediately. Look, this is him at wide receiver. Like, this is him literally playing wide receiver on guys. Like, that's insane, man. Like, so, yeah. Yeah, and there are concerns. Again, there's weaknesses to everybody's game, but sometimes he struggles to get off blocks at times. But the only thing that really kind of scares me is, you saw that 9 out of 10 sticky coverage thing, and that's true. But that one time that he's out, when he can't locate the deep ball, he kind of panics and he's just like handsy and he grabs a little bit. So again, in college, that's not a spot foul. It's just 15 yards. In the pros on Sundays, that's going to be a spot foul. So that's just something that he can probably clean up. And again, no prospect is perfect. But yeah, Marcus Jones, man, I mean, fast athlete, can hit, can play wide receiver if you need him to. I mean, you know how this team loves their versatility, so it's a really good fit. And somebody who, if he's there day 3, he's going to make a team very, very happy. And we're going to all look back like, man, there's no way that he should have fell this far.
Yeah, as a day 3, like that's not bad at all. I mean, we're seeing some of the clips here, and he just plays with a lot of physicality, and
that's Alec Pierce that everybody loves from Cincinnati that he just knocked that ball out from. So yeah, against guys that a lot of people really like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the punt and kick return as well. Like he's explosive with that. So, all right. So we've looked at some safeties. We looked at some corners. Do you have any corner sleepers that you want everyone to know about?
Joshua Williams would have been it, but I mean, I'm glad that we brought him up because I don't think that he should be viewed as a sleeper just because of his traits and everything as well too. And I mean, when you put the label of development on people, developmental prospect, it's seen as a knock. No, some guys just get it differently, and some guys are just going to take a little bit more time to adjust. I think Joshua Williams is going to be very good at this level, and I think he's going to be another guy that we look back and say, man, what the hell were we thinking? So, I mean, I'm glad you brought him up at first because I don't want him to be labeled as a sleeper, but it's hard for me to not call him my favorite sleeper because he went to a school that nobody really knows, and he's kind of just not being spoken about. So, yeah, it would be Joshua Williams for me, man. I really hope the 49ers find a way to get that done. And I think it was Jordan on last night's sprint right option that brought up, if you've kind of hit on a certain amount of picks already and you feel really good about them, then you have a chance to take a chance on a developmental corner. And I think that's where he may be for the 49ers or for any other team.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely a good one. I don't know if this is a sleeper, but Sean Jolly was another corner who I watched who I really like on the smaller end, but he's a playmaker, man, and he's very fast as well. So he's someone I liked. Other than that, like I haven't looked at a lot of cornerbacks because I don't see it as a 49ers like biggest need, which is
Mhm.
why like a lot of the guys we just talked about are guys that will go in like the later rounds, and that's okay. But yeah, man, thanks Jason for coming on today talking about these defensive backs. I mean, hopefully the 49ers find a way to get one of these guys, maybe two if we're lucky, come draft day. And thank you guys for watching, listening, and make sure you subscribe to Jason's channel. Plug that shit really quick.
Yeah, Jason Aponte on YouTube, at Jason Aponte 2103 on Twitter, Patreon Jason Aponte, where you can get a lot of the draft coverage that I'll be giving out in Vegas as well too. And yeah, I've got this other deal with an app called Winnow, winnow.app/Jason Aponte. Basically, what it is, it'll be a subscription to all of the things that I'm hearing on the draft floor. Who's talking about who, and the things that I necessarily wouldn't be putting on Twitter because I don't want people asking me source or who told you or dude, trust me, even though it's like literally someone from someone's front office who's saying that, and I don't really want to divulge that information. But if you're interested in that sort of stuff, especially with the Debo happenings, that's something that you can subscribe to too. And Steph, thank you again, man. Anytime that you need me on here, you know I got you. You're one of my favorite podcasters. And if there was a sleeper podcaster, it's you, and it's definitely somebody who is just being completely slept on and should be a day one product.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And man, you've been grinding this whole off season. So excited for that draft content. And once again, thank you guys for listening.